work to do at the time. We were all working, it was core team. We were all working 100-hour weeks, basically, trying to get this factory up and running. And we had equipment arriving on ocean cargo freighters from Italy out in the middle of the Atlantic. We had thousands of hectares of tomatoes coming up out of the ground, up and down the state of California. We had hundreds of contractors on the job site 24 hours a day, constructing and fabricating and welding and pulling wire. We had to hire hundreds of people to operate the factories and drive the trucks. And then finally, somehow it just all came together through teamwork. And on July 16th of that year, we threw the switch and we made 44 million kilograms of industrial tomato concentrate for the world market and changed the cost structure of the entire industry virtually overnight. And we did it without a single human boss. So we had no bosses, no titles, no managers, no supervisors, no structure except human beings and purpose. So that was kind of unusual for the industry, for any industry, I guess, at that time. And it was very successful. And so the company went on to grow. We added another factory in 1995 and then another factory in 2001. We expanded operations up the supply chain toward customers in remote warehouses across North America and toward the supply in terms of farming and transplanting and harvesting and trucking. And in the process, we became the largest tomato processor in the world. And I believe all of you have eaten our product because we export worldwide and it goes into myriad products that you get in the grocery store, starting with ketchup and salsa, and barbecue sauce and pizza sauce and spaghetti sauce and taco sauce and all the rest. And I believe everyone in North America has eaten our product at this point in time. And we've never deviated from the two core principles. So we put a stake in the ground. We said, these are the most important principles of human interaction. They are to human beings what gravity is to physics. If you imagine a world where everyone abandoned the use of force, we wouldn't need armies or navies or police or locks on our doors. And we know that's not reality, but that's not the point. The point is, the closer we get to that ideal state, the better off we are as human beings, and the more space and opportunity we open up for happiness, harmony, and prosperity. Imagine a world where everyone kept their commitments, where everyone did what they said they were going to do. It would be an amazing world, would it not? And we know that's not reality, but again, that's not the point. The point is, the closer we get to that desirable state, the better off we are as human beings. So that's what we've experienced as an enterprise, as a company, as a self-managed company, devoid of authoritarian, hierarchical, bureaucratic command and control. So I'll just tap the brakes there, Susan. I hope that sort of an overview for you.
I love, I've heard you tell that story many times now, and I just every time I just feel like the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, because it is so simple but so profound, right? I was thinking, I wanted to ask you a question I don't think I've asked you before, which is, as a young man, considering this as an option for the way to orient around work, what was your biggest surprise? I mean, you know, you're normal everyday, you know, bloke from traditional background, traditional work scenarios. What can you cast yourself back to? What was your biggest surprise, or something that you changed your mind about in those first early years?
Great question. Well, I went from thinking, wow, this is going to be really hard because of all the diverse personalities that we had on our team. And they were diverse, and we had some very domineering personalities on the team. And I remember thinking, this is just going to be so hard. It's just can't see. I hope it works, but it just seems impossible. And then realizing, if you really think it through, this is how we operate outside of work. I mean, we can't go up to people in the grocery store and just boss them around and tell them what to do. It doesn't really work in our families or civic organizations. So volunteer organizations certainly are based on command and control. So it's really wrapping your head around the simplicity of it and just appreciating, we're just going to treat people like we do in the rest of our lives. And as long as we have processes that we can in place that we can resolve differences of opinion, because those will occur, we don't have to stress overly about how hard it's going to be or how difficult it's going to be. It's not to say there aren't pitfalls and personality differences, and it doesn't solve the problem of people who are evil, but it's just a method of operating that's very natural. And if you kind of embrace the naturalness of it, it just becomes much easier. So I guess that surprised me a little bit. I lost.
Oh, sorry. I was talking. I was rambling. How did the move to self-management impact you personally in the work that you were personally accountable for as the money guy?
Okay. Well, I didn't have, we were extremely lean. So it's not like I had a big staff where I had to shift my mindset from command and control to, a horizontal team orientation. We're a tiny team. I mean, myself, we had one person handled accounts payable, one person handled accounts receivable, one person handled payroll, and that's it. There's 4 people, including me. So probably not much of a shift. Yeah, and the interesting thing about the culture was that the administrative offices were in proximity to the production floor, because the mission of the company is to produce. And so we were there. We always thought of ourselves as servants. So we were there to serve the people who would be considered blue collar technicians in a normal, kind of workplace. We were there to serve them. And so it was, we always had this kind of spirit of humility that went with the culture, and just kind of kept us all on the same level.
There's lots of good questions in the chat. I'll start at the beginning with Michaela's. Can you talk about how this is a great one, especially for Morningstar, how do you work out what you get paid and pay rates?
Yeah. So the idea with self-management is that it's not that there are no managers, it's that every single person is a manager. And every single person is involved to some degree in the characteristics of management, which are planning, organizing, controlling, selecting, and coordinating. That definition has never changed in 150 years. And so, planning is strategy, organizing is leadership, controlling is budgeting, selecting is hiring and firing, coordinating is teamwork. So everyone does that in the company. So we hire people at the market rate for their role in the geographic area, and that we can figure out what that is. And I know, for example, an industrial electrician salary would be 110,000 US dollars a year. And then we add a premium on top of that, which it could be anywhere from 7 to 12% or higher or lower, representing the fact that each person, including each new hire, is going to be a manager. And so they're going to be involved in strategy for their business unit, for their area of responsibility. They're going to be involved in hiring and firing new colleagues in their business unit. They're responsible for managing the costs in their business unit. Innovating, exercising leadership, and all the elements of teamwork. So we have a premium representing management. So a person is hired at market rate plus a premium. And everyone is salaried, by the way, that works year round. So regardless of role, pretty much everyone that works year round is on a salary because they're considered a professional in every sense of the word. And if you think about the mechanics in the factory, each one is personally responsible for $7, $8, $9, $10 million US of equipment. And that's a lot of responsibility, maybe more than some CEOs. So there's a lot on their shoulders. And so they come in, they're professional, they're paid a salary with a management premium. At the end of the year, there's a compensation committee at each location. And that's a representative committee. So it's formed by people from every area of the particular factory. And they get together and they sit down with each colleague associated with that factory location. And they review the individual's, what we call a colleague letter of understanding, which is their peer agreement, which is the infrastructure that replaces hierarchy. So that defines one's purpose, the content of one's work, the scope of one's decision-making authority, who each person is associated with in their process execution, any other kind of goals, objectives, any other kind of collateral information. And they review that, and then they review the performance for the year. And if the individual wants to receive a pay increase above and beyond the cost of living based on some newly acquired subject matter expertise or some project return on investment or some other measurable, quantifiable metric, that's great. They make a request, they negotiate the terms of their request with a committee, and they come out with a final solution. If a person doesn't want a pay increase above the cost of living, then they get a cost of living increase. So conceptually, pretty straightforward, pretty simple.
So it's pretty amazing how creating the conditions for individuals to use their personal agency in a way that gives them, again, more ownership and like control over both their conditions of pay and their conditions of work, again, seems so simple, but it's rarely encouraged, or organizations are rarely scaffolded in a way to not only be able to understand how to deal with that, but to support it. That's amazing. One of the amazing things about Morningstar for me. Simon has got a couple of quick questions. Well, one's maybe a little bit quick and one's probably more complicated. Meg Wheatley's work and a lot of other work suggests that, there are natural hierarchies in any organization. They just occur, in any ecosystem. They manifest organically. What hierarchies, how would you describe hierarchy at Morningstar?
There's no hierarchy of power unless two or more individuals negotiate one voluntarily, from which they can voluntarily disassociate if they so choose, because we've abandoned command authority. So command authority is not okay. So culturally, if someone tries to exercise command authority, they're quickly shut down or shunned or ignored because it's not okay. It's a violation of the colleague principles. Having said that, if two or more people wish to voluntarily associate in some sort of a hierarchy, perhaps an individual's not good at organizing his or her own work and wants someone else to do it for them, that's perfectly okay. The cut point, the key is the association and the understanding voluntary. And if it's voluntary, that's perfectly okay. So we could have 100 mini hierarchies inside our networked ecosystem that are voluntary associations, and that's how people want to organize themselves using their agency and autonomy. That's fine, no problem.
Thanks. And Simon's second question is, what happens if people don't keep their commitments?
So commitment making and commitment keeping is half the foundation. That's one of the two core principles of self-management as we've developed it, and that's a big deal. So commitments are, we believe in radical commitment keeping. If you say you're going to do something, we expect you to do it, or to renegotiate the commitment. And a lot of this conceptually comes from a guy named Fernando Flores. Maybe some of you have heard of him. And he's not only the godfather of artificial intelligence with his co-author Terry Winograd, but he also studied speech acts as Chile's youngest finance minister in the 1970s. And he came up with the theory and structure and life cycle of commitment making and commitment keeping. And it turns out that commitments are quite serious. And the problem that we have in many companies and with many individuals is that we're sloppy about the way we make and keep commitments. Commitments have structure. We should be negotiating conditions of satisfaction so we know when a commitment's been fulfilled or not. And then, we agree on performance and we declare completion and we review and accept the fulfillment of the commitment and we close the loop and move on. Unfortunately, many companies, many people don't do that. And so we're continually frustrated and upset with people that aren't seemingly keeping their commitments, when in fact, many times the problem is they never actually formed a real commitment in the first place.
And so how do you answer the question, what happens if people don't fulfill their commitments?
Well, then we have what we call a culture of request and response. So we can request change. So we expect people to address others as adults and address those things. So someone made a commitment to me and it's quite clear and they didn't fulfill it. I would ask them to fulfill a commitment, have what's called a real accountability conversation. Like Fred Kaufman demonstrates in some YouTube videos. That's really about how you related to the commitment. So when you didn't fulfill the commitment, what is your behavior saying to us as your peers about our ability to trust you, to do what you say you're going to do? Now I can go in a number of directions with these conversations. I may request the person finish the commitment. I may request they not engage in any more commitments with me. I may request that they leave the company. Depends on the issue and the seriousness of the context. So, and then if the person agrees with my request, then we're done. If they don't, I can invoke a process called gain in agreement, which will always lead to an ultimate conclusion.
And as far as I can remember, there's levels of intervention or levels of process dependent upon whether or not I guess the next step is agreed upon, right?
Yeah, so it's the first step is a direct request, and there's only 3 outcomes to that. The person agrees, they disagree, or we negotiate a third option. If they disagree, then and I still believe in my request, then I can escalate it to a mediation step with a third party, a trusted third party, whose job is just to help us resolve the issue. And we still have the same 3 possible outcomes. If we agree at that point, we're done or negotiate something. But if they still disagree and I still believe in my request, I can escalate to a third step, which is to bring in a panel of mediators and multiple mediators will lend their collective intelligence to the problem and try to help us resolve it. And we still have the same three possible outcomes there. So agree, we're done. Negotiate something, we're done. If they still disagree, I still believe in the request, then we have pre-agreed by virtue of subscribing to this process and this ecosystem that we'll submit our difference in writing to an arbitrator who will render a final decision because it has to end somewhere.
Hmm. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more. You've been in your description of colleague letters of understanding and negotiating commitments. I feel like you've been focusing on the just bilateral between two people, but I know a lot of what happens at Morningstar is in the context of team. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, teamwork is crucial. The colleague letter of understanding is the instrument by which we instantiate agreements by and between a number of people, where they resolve their purpose, their content of their work, their accountabilities, their goals, dreams, etc. And then they figure out who they need to connect with. That's really crucial. So who do I need to connect with in this network as an accountability partner, such that we are holding each other directly accountable. Now, I can hold anyone accountable in the network for anything that I perceive, but we often work with a group, a team, and we have responsibilities on a direct basis, on a day-to-day basis. And so who are those people who I directly need to connect with and to whom I need to be accountable? Generally shakes out, we found, to, I don't know, somewhere between 7 and 12, 7 and 14 people, because that's really pushing up against the limits of the number of people with whom you can cognitively maintain complex work relationships in your head before it becomes too fuzzy and you end up in the world of stigmergy. So people just naturally connect with people with whom they directly work, their direct colleagues, and also often people who are just upstream or just downstream in terms of process handoffs. So they figure that out on their own. There's no formula for it. There's no boss telling them who to connect to. People find their way, and they voluntarily connect. They resolve their agreements. They negotiate their agreements, who, what, why, when, where, and how. And those are dynamic agreements. They're not static. They're not carved in stone. People make drafts. They refine. They refine continuously. They never stop refining. So it's a dynamic network of, vibrant people exercising agency and autonomy on a continuous basis.
And so this kind of dovetails nicely into one of Nick's questions, which is around how do you help new people get to grips with this, right? Mm-hmm. Having to unlearn everything they've learned about working in organizations and to help them connect with and embody these new principles.
Do our best, and it starts with the hiring process. So the hiring process can be kind of extensive. We try to, do our best with the hiring process, and we start the education process there. So tell people right up front, this is not your mom and dad's kind of organization. This is a different kind of animal, and you don't get a title here. You don't have any perks. You don't have any power. You don't get to tell people what to do. You're responsible to everyone with whom you work. In a sense, everyone else here is your boss with respect to the commitments you make with those individuals. And you also have a boss, which is the mission statement of the enterprise. So people start to understand, they start to absorb, the zeitgeist during the hiring process. When they come on board, we got orientation programs, and we hook people up with coaches who can help guide them and act as Sherpas in the ecosystem. And we expect people to be curious. I mean, we look for curiosity as a self-management competency. So we want people to come in and ask a million questions. That's how you learn. The more questions you ask and the faster you ask them, the quicker you're going to learn. So, we've had, people come in and tell us, it's a little challenging sometimes to navigate, figure things out, because then they have to come in and negotiate a colleague letter of understanding and a personal mission statement and a process responsibilities and all the rest, and decide who to connect to and who not to connect to and all the rest. But, we've had people say, it took me a few months, but, after a while, I got very comfortable and I understood where I was at. So it's always going to take time. We try to help people as best we can.
Over the years, we've had these conversations, and I'm eternally grateful to you for helping me to understand. And you mentioned it already today, that everybody that works for Morningstar is a professional. So the idea of maybe individual humans that have less experience or lesser number of years of formalized education, for example, coming into organization and being able to, with that level of, coaching and Sherpaing, really fully participate at levels that again, our judgment and bias would maybe not lead us to believe that could be possible, right? And I think that it's quite similar in the human services sector, right? Many of the people whose vocation is to care for others have traditionally been less valued than quote unquote white collar workers. Can you talk a little bit about what some of the magic that you've seen with humans, that maybe they never could believe for themselves, that working in this way and actualizing themselves as humans through work could be possible? And I know that's getting a little esoteric, but I think it's important.
Yeah, it is. It is important. I think one of the real delights, and we see it every year consistently, is that um, because leadership and innovation can spring forward at any point, at any time in this networked environment, it's just always exciting and fun to see uh, that come from an unexpected source. And we have just so many examples of that. One year, we had a mechanic who was originally from New Zealand, actually, from one of your tomato factories in New Zealand. And he's now with Morningstar. And I was just walking around the factory one day, and he realized that the way that they were handling materials was really inefficient, and particularly in chemicals. And so he um, theorized a new process, entirely new process from scratch. And he sketched out some engineering diagrams and kind of shared it with his colleagues, and persuaded all of the stakeholders that would be affected that they should change the process. And he talked directly to his finance colleagues, and found some budget, and implemented a project, and ended up saving millions of dollars. And it was just spectacular. I mean, it's like wow, it's so amazing. And those kinds of opportunities are available to every single person all the time. So leadership opportunities, innovation opportunities, disruptive innovation opportunities, opportunities for new products and services, new lines of business. Those kinds of things are just the sky's the limit. So we think it unlocks blue sky leadership and innovation. And it's just kind of delightful to sort of see that unfold on a consistent basis.
Thanks for that. A couple of quick ones here. In terms of your dispute resolution, the mediators and the arbitrators, are they internal or external to the organization?
They're internal. They're internal. Although the arbitrator is the president or a designee of the president, so the designated arbitrator could be external. But other than that, everyone else is internal, and they're just people who are acceptable to both parties.
And Michaela wants to know, how do you ensure that you meet like compliance standards? I guess the way that I'd interpret this is, uh, how do you work within a world of um, uh, external stakeholders and what's the word I'm looking for? Supply chain that might not operate the same way. How do you make that bridge towards more what I would call a world or traditional organizations and expectations there when you are different?
Yeah. So we are heavily regulated as a food company. We're creating a product people are ingesting into their bodies. We have probably 50 regulatory agencies at all levels of government. Um, so it's important to be compliant. And our customers are vigilant too, so they demand compliance. There's no slacking off, and compliance adherence is just another process that someone has to own and be accountable for. So we got some of the smartest people on the planet in terms of food compliance and regulatory compliance, and they're probably more rigorous than, or at least as rigorous as any other company in terms of making sure that every single regulation is followed to the letter. And our goal is to exceed regulatory requirements, 10 to 20%, because we found over the years that really keeps us in good stead with these agencies and keeps us out of trouble. And so we want to not only meet regulations, we want to exceed them by quite a bit.
Kate wants to know, and I think both of us have a story around this because of the work that we're doing in the world with other organizations who are working like this. But I think specifically, she wants to know, are there any other organizations who have kind of wholesale taken the Morningstar principles to set up an organization?
Yes. And one of them is right in the same town as Morningstar's original factory. Los Banos, California is the exact geographic center of the state of California. And it's a little startup that's actually started just last year, and it's called Fresh Fill. Yeah, I think their website's Fresh Fill Stores. But they came to me and said, we want to adopt self-management, pretty much along the lines of Morningstar. And they live in the same community as Morningstar, and many of their friends worked at Morningstar, and so they saw the benefits, and so they wanted to adopt self-management pretty much as practiced at Morningstar. And so they are in the convenience store business, and they're a very disruptive little company because I don't know what convenience stores are like in Australia, but in California, they're kind of dingy places. They sell a lot of liquor and tobacco and have dirty bathrooms and, dirty gas pumps out front. And they're not especially enticing environments. But Freshfill took a completely different approach. So they have gleaming white stores, wide open aisles, fresh fruits and vegetables, a raw natural juice bar, a craft beer cave, sparkling clean bathrooms, nitro infused coffee, solar power, electric car charging, a gleaming white concept. And they're completely disrupting the convenience store industry. We did a hiring fair, and most of the people they're hiring to run the store are young people, 18, 19, 20 years old, 21. And they said almost to a person, you know, look, we're sick and tired of working at jobs where we're totally micromanaged. We're sick and tired of that. We want to work at a place where we can feel like we own it, where we feel like we have some agency. And that's exactly what they've got. And the cool thing about Freshfill is that they can pay people more and give them better benefits because they're not paying what Gary Hamel calls the management tax, which is the cost of bureaucracy. So they're not paying all that for all that hierarchy and management overhead. They can put it right in the pockets of the workers, and they love it. So they're looking to grow. I think it's really cool.
That's great. I don't think I've quite heard that story. So thanks for that, Doug. And that actually is a really nice segue into Justin's question, which is around, how do you, I guess, in the recruitment process, how do you balance the technical competency with a cultural alignment or a willingness to, and maybe for me it would be more than a willingness, but like what you're describing for the young people coming into leadership positions at Freshfill, like how, you and I struggle with this all the time, right? What is the right language? What is this way of working is every year, we've had ourselves on the back, because the pool of potential participants is exponentially growing, but it's still not fully in our language or our way of thinking about work. So how do you do that? How do you attract people who really want to change the way they work and what's possible in the workplace with people that are highly technically competent?
Well, that's a definite challenge because sometimes you need a certain slice of technical expertise that's not readily available in a particular market or in your area. And so you're out looking for that. And when you find it, oftentimes that comes with some baggage. So I guess one of the challenges that I've come to see is that sometimes when we hire for some unique type of expertise, we'll be looking at people who are mid-career, maybe in their 40s, maybe they've grown up in a traditional hierarchy. They're used to perks and power. They're used to command authority and titles and all the stuff that comes with a traditional organization. And then, so how do you balance, well, we want you to come to our organization and share your technical whiz, bang thinking, but we we don't want you to come in and be a boss. And that seems to be challenging because at some point, if you work long enough, you marinate long enough in that kind of mindset, it's hard to turn off. And so we have different ways that expresses itself. Some people profess a belief in self-management, and I think they're very sincere. But they come into the environment and they find that it's just too difficult, too easy to revert back to command and control. And usually that takes some time to shake out because when they try to covertly exercise command and control, then the culture tends to tune them out. And then they start to just lose credibility and they eventually leave. Other people sincerely accept the principles of self-management and are very successful, and they make the adjustment. So kudos to them because they're overcoming, maybe a decade or two of traditional management thinking. And then I think there is a class of people who come in and profess alignment with self-management and yet retain kind of a hidden agenda to just sort of maintain their traditional approach to things. And those people, they tend to wash out fairly quickly.
Hmm.
So it's a balancing act always.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that the question that I get most often asked, and some of the frustration is, okay, so what is my career path? What is my growth path? What is the next job that I'm going to go for? What's the next pay raise I'm going to get? When that doesn't exist in the organization, a shift needs to take place. And if it's not something that people can cope with, or cope with understanding that they've got agency over that, and it's based on proposals and what they're actually committing to, it changes the game really. Kate would like to know, is there anything specific that you do in Morningstar to nurture relationships of the community within the organization?
Well, we have lots of little mini sessions around self-management. So we have colleagues that kind of have brown bag lunches, and they or just get-togethers with colleagues, and they sit around and pick a topic and du jour, and they sit around and talk about it. And they do that on a regular basis, like every week or every other week. So we got that, and then we've got some kind of bespoke education programs around things like emotional intelligence, emotional self-mastery. Then we have regular orientation sessions. Those can last a half day, all day, or more. And then we have councils, so we got kind of regular get-togethers for people involved in similar disciplines, so that they can network with each other around their particular subject matter expertise. And then, people can get together on their own as much as they want to. So in terms of kind of intentional programs, I'd say kind of the things I lined up, mini sessions, the orientations, and sort of the bespoke sessions. That's kind of the stuff that we provide for people. But of course, as agents with free will, they're free to do whatever they want to nurture those relationships.
Wendy, it is keen for you to talk a little bit more about your Always On, Always Near article.
Well, remind me what that was. When was that, or where was it?
It was in HuffPost. Wendy? You're on mute, Wendy.
Yeah, sorry. Hi, Doug.
Hi.
Yeah, Kate put a link in Slack to a HuffPost article that you wrote. And it was principles, the 12 keys to the workplace of the future.
Right.
And you've got initiative, tolerance for ambiguity, consciousness, contribution, mindset. But I was just really curious that always on, always near scared me, because it felt like, you were always on and always near. It sounded intense.
Yeah, well, we don't want people to burn out and be overwhelmed by messages. But when they're at work, or when they're available to their colleagues, we want them to be responsive, of course, and that's really what it's all about. There's a great book, I highly recommend it, by a guy named Ken Thompson, called BioTeams, and he's got organizational designs based on nature's best designs, and he's got a number of different concepts from the world of plants and animals that are really powerful metaphors for humans in organizations. So just really recommend that, and I think that's where I got that concept in the first place. I'll put a link in the chat here.
Any last questions for Doug, anybody, before we let him? I'll ask you the question. The 12 keys today. Pick your top two.
I'm going to say initiative. That always comes comes into place. I'm going to say emotional self-mastery. I think it's really crucial that, people, be in command of themselves so that they're, able to address whatever happens, in the workplace, because when everybody's a manager, everyone has agency and autonomy, there's, it can be disconcerting if you're used to the opposite. So people have to have a certain amount of emotional self-mastery, and that elevates others in the team, and it elevates everyone, and it makes it much easier to have a self-managed environment. So initiative, emotional self-mastery.
And with that, thanks so much, Doug. It's been great as always. Really, really appreciate it. And see you soon. Thanks.
All right. Hey, bye-bye. Take care.
Well, I would love for us to just take a couple of minutes just to maybe quietly reflect and make a couple of notes on what stood out the most. And then what I'd like to do is send you off into some breakout rooms to have conversations about maybe about what spoke to you the most and what you're still super curious about. And then we can bring that back to the group. So I'll just maybe give you a minute, and in that time I'll organize some breakout rooms, and I'll give you about maybe 7 minutes in your room, maybe 10 actually in your room, to have a conversation in the small group. Welcome back, everyone. Let's hear back. Who'd like to share back what came up in their rooms? I guess on the first question, what did you find most interesting or most inspiring?
I'll go first, Susan. I thought the simplicity of their principles was really impressive. I love that. But as we discussed in our chat room, what we realised is then you hit the reality of, which I think he was alluding to, with the fact that the whole notion of self-management, even though you can perhaps embrace the principle in theory, then the practice of it, and he was alluding to the fact that people may come in and profess a commitment to it, but then eventually they're found out because they fall back to command and control. So I think we were talking around the issue of, how do you find the right people? And it is difficult to move. I mean, not everybody is going to be comfortable with this type of culture. And those people are currently probably employed in the organisation. So there is that process of self-selection. And I was just reflecting on, at Uniting Care West, we've started down this path. Already we've found that some people have left because they've just indicated they're not happy with the process. And I think Nikki indicated that, there are some people who just say, we don't want this. We don't want this level of accountability or the tension of resolving conflict and that sort of thing. So that was, in a nutshell, what we were talking about.
Yeah, thanks for that. Who else like to share?
I'm happy to share a little bit. Kate and Andrea, make sure you comment as well. But yeah, we also talked about that it's different, if you're starting a new org or if you're have existing organisation that's shifting. But also maybe it will be a generational thing, as he commented with the convenience store startup. There might be a generation that comes through that is not up for management. So that could be interesting. We talked a lot about the conflict resolution actually, and how that works in reality, and whether it sounds like quite a long, complex process, but perhaps that's what's required actually to resolve disputes, and we just don't generally take the time to do it. What else did we talk about, Andrea, Kate?
Okay. Yeah, we talked about the accountability and the conflict, and if they were both in place and robust, then it probably mostly worked well. That you wouldn't have to escalate right up very often because people were using it properly. We also talked about like making your own teams of who you have to connect with, how that would play out, and that yeah, I think we had the comment, what if nobody wanted to be on your team? And what would that do and say? So it was just interesting to think about it being so different. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks. Who else?
I was always curious about the emotional, I suppose, well, interactions, partly the conflict process, but so, and I was curious that at the end, Doug said that, you know, the two things, and I understand it's just at the moment, but two of the 12 keys, one was emotional self-mastery, and I always want to know what does that mean? And if someone went through the conflict process and how or what things are put in place to help re-heal a relationship that might be damaged by breaking the commitments, and yeah, what are some of the things? And I get that he was saying, well, you know, everyone's autonomous, so it's you know, people can meet and create community as much as they like, but on the other hand, there's a whole lot of structure and process to make sure that work happens, and that so it's not structureless, and you know, supporting community and relationships doesn't have to be structureless either. Don't know, just questions, thoughts.
Oh, thanks. Who else? Was anything pinging for anybody about how, if any of the principles that Doug's talking about are either currently in play in an experiment in your organization, or something that you might be keen to give a go in a small way, or does it just seem to be so? Because, you know, I know this as well as anybody, like the way he talks about it just makes it seem so obvious and so easy and so like seamless. And you know, understanding that they've been going this way for about 12 years now. So I'm sure that if we would have been having this conversation and this reflection with Doug 2 years ago or 5 years ago or 7 years ago, it would have been different. And I'm sure that more of those teething pains would have been in place. Justin, you say in the chat, you know, thinking about if the mission is our boss, then it allows us to kind of navigate without the need for the parent to tell us what to do continually, or to be like subject to another human or a role to be telling us what to do and making sure that we're aligned. What else did you find, if anything, that might be actionable from
Susan, I thought I'd be interested to hear what people think about the remuneration principle. I found that there was, once again, this disarming simplicity about it, and I actually am tasked with thinking through our remuneration strategy. And I thought, wow, we are subject to a number of externalities. I think in Australia, there is the equal remuneration order that is a headache for everyone. But actually, I could see that within the existing structure that we work within, you could come up with something as simple as he was suggesting. And the research generally says that in our sector, people are not coming for the money, they're coming for altruistic purposes. So once again, I thought that was, I'd just be interested to see whether people would think what he's suggesting, which was you work out market rates geographically and then you add, what was it, 12% for the component, which, as I would read it, is your self-management skill component. I thought it was pretty good. Be interested to hear what people think.
I agree, Simon. I think it's really good, and it does. I guess it answers some of the questions that I've had in the past about how do self-managed teams work out the remuneration, because you are expecting them to do more than their typical role in typical role. The other thing I liked was, because we have had some discussions with staff, and promotions came up. They said, well, where would you go? What would you do? And where's your journey? And yeah, it's great to say, well, it's up to you, and it's based on your proposals and you're increasing your skills or engaging in further work. I thought that's really great too, actually.
Can I just say, we just had a Hui Wednesday with Susan in our upper part of our organisation. Oh, a meeting, sorry, a Hui. It came up in one of the talking groups, and it was a very diverse conversation. People were excited because we've started some self-managing, so there's been shifting of roles and people can follow initiatives and follow their passions a bit. And there seems to be a very, those continuums of excitement and satisfaction that you're doing things that you really want to do within the organisation. And then just as the gear's shifting again, a little bit of frustration that you're bringing, well, you're feeling like you're bringing more quality, but it's not going to get recognised financially. And so there is a tension, which is, I think, a really good conversation we're going to have to keep having. Yeah. No money changes at this stage.
What Doug didn't talk about is the way that they do. So every year you renegotiate your colleague letter of understanding fully. So as he said, it's constantly being refined. But I think that every year, depending on the performance of the factory, there is a pool of, I guess, profit that gets redistributed out amongst the teams. And it's actually up to the teams to decide, or actually to self-nominate for their pay rises and their increases. He talked about that a little bit, and what he's shared with me in the past is that, let's say for example, there's 10 people on the team, and there's $1,000 to redistribute at the end of the year. Most people will make a petition for 0.5 of what that total, even if it was equally divided, could be. And very rarely do people put forward a proposal for more than would be an equivalent share for everybody in the team. So that's quite interesting if you look at it from a kind of a behavioral perspective as well. And my imagination would be that also does help to engender teamwork, and also helps engender this sense of being committed and responsible and accountable to a team. So that's another interesting element of the pay.
And it must also mean the end of performance management, I would have thought. I mean,
it does, because the people that are nominated as your team responsible and accountables are basically responsible for what was previously external, potentially arbitrary performance management measures.
Yeah, music to my ears, I must say.
I don't think it completely gets rid of a type of performance management. It depends on how you how you run those agreements, because with the compliance factor, I think there's always going to be those checks and balances around, are we meeting compliance? And I loved what he said about, we actually try and go 20% above compliance. We set up as a self-managed organisation from the get-go, so we have completely transparent budgeting and payroll tools. So and because it's NDIS, it's all billable hours, and so people actually see the full billable hours that get charged to the NDIS and all of their transaction reports. They have their own account within our system. They know what's been billed and what's been errored, or where there's issues that they need to fix. That gets fixed, that gets processed again, and then every month they get an account statement of what they've got in their account. The organisation takes a percentage for all the administration costs, and then people have their own money with which what they decide what to do, and how much they're going to get paid, and how much they want to put in salary sacrifice, and how much they want to put in their super and things like that. But what we are finding is that whole process takes a fair bit of responsibility to monitor. And some of the monitoring side of it, some people don't want to do. So, or they're not so good at doing, or they're really not interested, they just want to be with people, that kind of thing. So we're now starting to look at, do we set up some type of remuneration as a hourly rate for people who just want to do the being with people, and I'll put my notes in the system job, and they don't want to do anything else. Then they might have, we've got coaches instead of supervisors, they might have their coach that will do the other part of the responsibility. We're looking at maybe that might work for those that don't want to.
I mean, I think that goes, very specifically to what Doug said, is that it's a negotiation, right? If somebody really doesn't want to do this, doesn't feel comfortable, then they negotiate with somebody who might want to take on that responsibility, or a group of people, and just express their needs, right? Like, how do we create the conditions where people can actually ask for what they need, and that to be okay, and for them not to be judged or disadvantaged because they're actually making commitments based on what their individual needs are. And this is again just like another way that we have to kind of unwind ourselves from everything that we've been taught about what it's like to be an employee, or what our responsibilities and accountabilities in the workplace are. Cool. I mean, let me see. Oh yeah. Is that an invitation, Nikki?
Yes, it is. I, for one, and I'm sure there's others like me, I just find it difficult sometimes to get onto Slack and to have those conversations there. Time thing, etc., etc. So we just talked, a few of us have spoke about it would be quite good to catch up and keep having these discussions and sharing ideas and conversations throughout this program, but then probably beyond as well. And we know there's others that are interested in having similar discussions. So if anybody wants to catch up one evening over a beer or a glass of wine, that's compulsory. And yeah, it'd be good to do. But sorry, guys that are outside of the Perth area, because I realise you wouldn't be able to do that, obviously.
Thanks for that, Nikki. And I know, Kate, that you had popped into the Slack that you'd be up for maybe hosting a Zoom, or I guess sessions outside of our mandated times. I think just keep on making those invitations, and yeah, getting together and really just chewing the fat on these things outside of the kind of structure of this program, I think is really worthwhile if you can make it happen. So self-organize yourself to do that. I'd love to just do, we didn't have time to do a check-in round, so I was feeling a little bit unsettled, but let's do a checkout. Anybody have a good checkout question? Go on, Andrea.
I was just thinking, if you had your magic wand, what would you try and do first? What would you, if it was going to be successful, what would you change first in the organisation?
You want to demonstrate?
Yeah, I would immediately start with some really great accountability and conflict discussions, whatever the right language is.
Thanks. Justin, would you, if you had a magic wand, what would you do first?
You're gonna have to type.
All right, well, Justin's typing Wendy.
Yeah, I think it would be yeah, working with teams to help them start creating structures for how they were going to work out when they don't agree, basically. Yeah, might be the starting point. Yeah.
Cool, thanks. Simon.
I think it'd be probably, and this is a bit of a risky thing, but calling out amongst my executive more direct conversations about committing to principles like we have heard today, and seeing where we get to.
Cool. Sheila?
Sorry, who did you say? Did you say Michaela, Susan?
I did.
Ah, cool. Thanks. I didn't quite hear that. What to start? What's coming up for us at the moment is culture, and I love those principles that Doug talked about. So being able to spend more time with people in the early days of when they were starting around culture and principles and those agreements, that would be cool.
Cool. Nikki?
Oh, I'm not muted, didn't realise. I think it would be around the emotional self-mastery and really giving people tools for them to think about where they're at now, because it's really quite a, I guess, toxic is maybe a really too hard a word, but it feels pressured for a lot of people. So I think giving people tools around where they are now, making it safe for them to then have that space to then move forward.
Thanks. Mark?
That's funny. Yeah, I would wave the wand and just try to create a place where people are able to feel safe, to have the open and honest communication, but also then as a collective set up some procedures and just get everyone to be able to be free to speak how they feel, but then also put things into place to make it better, I guess.
Thanks, Mark. Nick?
For me, in my context, I feel like what we really have going for us is the culture and the values that really do kind of embrace and encourage and are hungry for this. I think where we're getting a bit stuck is around the structural side of things and the things that aren't actually documented. So I take his point about in lots of organizations are a bit sloppy about the way that we make and keep commitments. So for me, it's in our context, maybe getting a bit more clarity collectively around where accountabilities lie, making sure that's everybody is really clear on that and is agreement on that. Putting documenting some of that, putting some of those sort of structural things in place to help really aid us in the way we work.
Kate?
It's a little hard not being in an organisation, but I think for me, creating, I've got this sort of term ground zero, but a place that a group of people regularly come together so that it's a circle really, and using that as a place to create that safety where people can speak and to know that it's always there as a place to communicate. And from there, talking a bit like Mark said, just listening, finding out what people want to do, where's the place to start, using some of the great books around that set out, places to start and really working through those in a kind of logical way. Yeah.
And Ruth?
Yeah, I think I think it would be really interesting for us to look at what the, say, 2 principles might need to be for our organisation. So what staff expect others to follow. And I suspect that, you know, being aware that the tomato factory slightly different to our setup scenario, but that, you know, not only keeping commitments to each other internally, but that they're committing to outcomes for the people that we work with. But yeah, I think it would be really interesting to sound out what, say, just 2 key commitments are and how we can initiate those as the principles. Yeah, I think it would be very freeing.
Very cool. Thanks, everybody. I really enjoyed the session. I'd love for you to be thinking about between now and the next session what experiment you're going to try, and how you're going to document how that goes. So we'll see you on the Slacks, and we'll see you together back here next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye.